It begins in a house that is no longer a home. A house where the walls remember everything, but speak of nothing. Where the air feels heavier than it should, as if the air itself has learned to mourn. There is a kitchen at the center of this place. The kind of kitchen where birthdays once happened, where laughter once rang out over the smell of vanilla cake, but now it stands frozen in a half-light. The curtains hang still and limp. The only sound is the steady tick of the old clock on the wall. Each second is loud and deliberate, and then without warning, it stops. Silence fills the room like water filling a glass. Some say the silence began years ago on a night when a candle was lit for the Brennan family's eldest child. A night that should have been a celebration. Instead, it became the first in a line of vanishings, a line that would stretch across decades, every disappearance striking on the very edge of the 16th year, not a day sooner and never a day later. Imagine growing up in a place where birthdays are not a milestone, but a countdown, each day drawing you closer to an invisible point that no one can explain. Imagine knowing that no Brennan child has ever survived the crossing into 16. The number becomes a shadow that follows you into every waking moment. It haunts you in the quiet before sleep. It stands at the foot of your bed in dreams. You cannot remember in the morning. The Brennan family had no answers, and yet they followed the same pattern with every child. Every year a birthday was celebrated as if it might be the last, because for them it always was. Neighbors would bring gifts, family would take photographs, but behind every smile was the question, who will be next and how much time is left? There are stories whispered in the town, stories of lights seen in the Brennan windows long after midnight. Lights that pulse and fade like breathing. Some tell of hearing footsteps on the gravel drive when no one was there. Others claim to have seen the missing children in other towns years later, older, but somehow wrong faces, familiar yet drained of the spark they once had. The last child disappeared the same way as the first, without sound, without struggle, without a single trace. Their bed was found neatly made, their shoes by the door, and yet they were gone as if they had stepped through a door no one else could see. Some believe the disappearances are the work of human hands. Others insist there is something ancient and unseen at work, a debt paid in children, a curse older than the town itself. The truth has never been found, the pattern never broken, and the questions remain like an ache in the bones of the place. When you walk past the Brennan house today, the windows are covered. The roof sags under years of rain and wind. Yet there is still a sense that the place is listening, that if you stop too long, the air will notice you, and you will feel a pull to the front steps. The town does not speak of it openly. They change the subject. They avoid the street, but the shadow of the Brennans is still here, still waiting, still counting. If you were born into that family, if you could see the years racing toward that cursed birthday, would you run? Would you hide? Or would you stay and wait to see what comes for you when the clock strikes? 16 asterisk. The Brennan family did not always live in shadow. They came to the coast generations ago, long before the road was paved, when the town was nothing more than a scatter of wooden houses clinging to the cliffs. They were builders, fishermen, traders, known for working with their hands and for keeping to themselves. The land they claimed stretched from the stony beach to the thick belt of pine forest behind it. It was said that the house they built stood exactly where the land met the oldest path in the region, a path that led through the trees to a place the elders never spoke about. In those early years, the Brennans were respected. They supplied timber for the docks. They mended boats battered by winter storms. At church, they sat together in the front pew, dressed in clean wool and leather boots polished to a shine. Photographs from the time show smiling faces, mothers holding infants, fathers standing straight, and proud children running barefoot across the yard. No one looking at those pictures could guess the darkness that would one day stain the name. The Thievewood house itself was a work of craft. 3 stories of pale wood with wide windows that faced the sea. Inside it was warm in winter, with thick rugs and a fire that burned day and night. The kitchen smelled of bread and honey. Upstairs, each child had a room of their own, bright with hand-sewn curtains and shelves full of books and carved toys. It was the kind of home that seemed built to last, a place meant to shelter generations. The first whispers of strangeness came quietly. Neighbors noticed that the Brennans celebrated birthdays different. Not with large gatherings or music, but with small family dinners and private rituals. Some said they saw the parents light 3 candles in the attic before each birthday. Others claimed they heard faint singing carried on the wind. From the house, a melody no one recognized. Still, life went on without incident for many years. The children played in the meadow. They helped mend fishing nets at the shore. They walked to school along the cliff road, just like everyone else. If there was a shadow, it stayed at the edge of their lives, just beyond sight. Then the first child vanished on the eve of their 16th year. The shock rippled through the town. At first, the family spoke little of it. Parents told the neighbors that the child had run away in the night, searching for adventure beyond the coast. It was the kind of story that people wanted to believe, but there were details that did not fit. The bedroom was tidy, as if the occupant had simply ceased to exist. There were no footprints in the yard. No marks of struggle, no sign of departure. Still, the town accepted the tale. In those days, people did not press too hard for the truth. In the years that followed, more children were born into the Brennan family, each one growing in the same bright rooms, playing in the same meadow, and each one reaching that same fateful age. One by one, they disappeared, always near the 16th birthday, always without trace. The pattern became impossible to ignore, but the Brennans never left. They stayed in the house, watching each new child grow, counting the days. Without ever speaking the fear aloud, by the time the 4th disappearance came, the town had changed. Neighbors began to cross the street rather than greet a Brennan in passing. Whispers followed the family into the market and the church. Some claimed the land itself was cursed. Others spoke of an old bargain struck long before the family arrived, a promise sealed in blood. The Brennans never answered these rumors. They carried themselves with the same quiet dignity, but their eyes grew harder, their voices lower, and their home became a fortress. Even now, long after the last child vanished, the story of the Brennans lingers like salt on the wind. The town remembers the family as they were before the shadow fell, but it remembers too that there remembers too. The town remembers the family as they were before the shadow fell, but it remembers too the silence that came after a silence that was never broken. The pattern did not emerge all at once. It crept in quietly, like water seeping into the seams of a ship. At first, each loss was treated as its own tragedy, a single awful night that could not possibly repeat. The family mourned in silence. The town lowered its eyes and carried on. But when the second child vanished on the same date as the first, and in the same untraceable way, a kind of cold recognition settled over everyone. The Brennans never held funerals. There were no bodies, no graves. Instead, they locked the bedroom doors of the missing and left everything inside untouched. Beds still made, clothes still folded, photographs still smiling from the shelves. It was as if the family believed the children might return any moment, or as if they could not bear to admit that they would not. From then, on the 16th birthday, became a clock that everyone could hear ticking. For each child, the days leading up to that day carried an unspoken weight. Some grew restless. Others became strangely quiet. There were nights when neighbors swore they saw one of the Brennan children standing alone in the yard, long after midnight, staring at the tree line as if listening to something only they could. Here certain details repeated themselves. Each child seemed healthy and content until the final week. Then came the change, eyes rimmed with exhaustion, sudden moments of distraction in the middle of conversations, fingers tracing shapes on tabletops or in the dirt outside. No one could say where these shapes came from or what they meant, and when asked, the children only shook their heads and said they could not remember drawing them at all on. The last night, there was never noise. No shouts for help, no sound of doors opening, no barking from the family dog. In the morning, the child was gone, the bed empty, the shoes neatly by the door, the window closed from the inside. The townspeople began to whisper about the attic. That narrow space above the third floor had no windows. Its single door was always locked. Yet on certain nights, just before a disappearance, a faint glow would seep out from the thin line at the bottom. It was not the yellow light of candles or lamps. It was pale and cold like moonlight through water. Some claimed they saw shadows moving inside, even when the whole family was downstairs. By the time the fifth child went missing, the Brennan home had taken on a different presence. It no longer felt like a place to live. It felt like a place to wait. The air seemed thick and heavy, even in summer. The walls felt closer than they were. Those who stepped inside swore they could hear faint echoes in the halls, like someone whispering from far away, but too soft to make out the words. The family withdrew almost entirely from the town. They bought supplies in bulk, so they would not have to visit the market often. When they did appear in public, they spoke in short, clipped sentences, and their eyes darted to the clock tower as if always measuring the hours left there. Were attempts to stop the pattern. One year an uncle took a child away weeks before their birthday. They traveled far inland to stay with distant relatives, but on the morning of the birthday, the bed was empty there too. No signs of forced entry. No footprints in the frost. It was as if distance made no difference at all. The disappearances became something the town both feared and accepted, like the turning of the seasons. Each new Brennan child was greeted not with celebration, but with a kind of pity. Everyone knew the countdown had begun the moment they were born. The last disappearance left the house in complete silence. No more children, no more birthdays, only a structure full of locked rooms, their contents gathering dust, and an attic door that still seemed to glow on certain nights. The mystery had fully taken root. It was no longer a series of tragedies. It was a living shadow woven into the identity of the family, a shadow that no one could name and no one could escape. The investigation into the Brennan vanishings was never straightforward. Each time the authorities arrived, they found the same details: rooms untouched, windows closed, doors locked from the inside. No signs of struggle or forced entry. It was as if the children had stepped out of existence rather than out of the house. Over the years, certain pieces of evidence surfaced and then vanished again. Old police reports went missing from the town records. Photographs taken during searches came back from development with frames mysteriously blank. In one case, a journal belonging to one of the children was found hidden under a floorboard in the smallest bedroom. Most of the pages were filled with harmless entries about school and family life, but scattered among them were passages that made no sense. Lines about hearing someone call their name from the attic when no one was there. Drawings of tall, faceless shapes standing among the trees. A date circled over and over again with the words "Almost here" written beside it. Another time, a fisherman claimed to have found a shoe floating in the tidal pools below the cliffs. It matched the size and brand worn by one of the missing, but the Brennans insisted it was not theirs and refused to take it back. The shoe later disappeared from the evidence locker. No one could explain how. There was also the matter of the unmarked graves in the old cemetery at the edge of the pine forest. A local historian discovered them while cataloging headstones for the town archives. 5 small mounds with no names, no dates, just weathered wooden markers leaning toward the earth. Some believed they belonged to children who had died during an influenza outbreak decades earlier. Others whispered they were the final resting place of the Brennan children, taken long before anyone could find them. No digging was ever allowed to confirm the truth. One of the more puzzling pieces came from a retired police officer who swore he saw one of the missing children years after their disappearance. It was in a town 200 miles away. The officer recognized the face instantly, though the eyes seemed different, somehow dull and unfocused. He approached to speak, but the child turned and walked into a narrow alley. When the officer followed, the space was empty. There was no sign anyone had been there at all. The story was dismissed as a case of mistaken identity, but the officer never changed his account. There was the attic. Every investigator who tried to access it was told by the Brennans that the key had been lost. Yet on more than one occasion, someone claimed to have heard faint noises from above, slow, dragging footsteps, soft knocks, and once the sound of a low voice repeating something too quietly to understand. One report described a strange chill emanating from the attic door, even when the rest of the house was warm from the fire. Downstairs experts were brought in over the years. Some suggested environmental explanations: toxic mold, carbon monoxide leaks, psychological contagion brought on by shared trauma. Others believed the disappearances were staged, that the Brennans themselves were hiding the children for reasons unknown. But none of these theories accounted for the lack of physical evidence. No footprints, no fibers, no fingerprints that should not have been there, no trace of departure in any form. Even the timeline raised questions. The disappearances always happened within hours of the 16th birthday, never before, never after. One folklorist pointed out that the number 16 held significance in certain old European traditions, marking the point at which a child was no longer under the protection of household spirits. The idea was dismissed as superstition, but in the absence of a better explanation, it clung stubbornly to the edges of the story. Every clue seemed to open a door to nowhere. A journal without answers, a shoe that vanished, graves that could not be examined, sightings that dissolved into air, the attic door that remained locked and cold. Nothing connected in a way that could hold. The pieces refused to form a complete picture. And so the mystery stayed where it had always been, just out of reach, shifting each time someone thought they were close, like the tide pulling back from the shore, leaving only damp sand and the feeling that something had been there only moments before. Grief in the Brennan family was not loud. It was not the kind that spilled into the street with wailing and embraces. It was a slow poison that worked in silence. The parents grew thinner each year, faces drawn tight, eyes shadowed as if they had not slept in weeks. There were no conversations in the market anymore, only quiet nods and the quick exchange of coins for bread and milk inside the house. The air itself seemed different. The scent of wood smoke and baking bread was gone, replaced with something colder. Rooms that had once been full of music or laughter now carried only the faint hum of the wind through the walls. The remaining children spoke less as they grew older, as if speaking too much might draw attention from whatever it was that came for them at 16. By the time the last child in the family reached 14, the entire household moved in a kind of suspended dread. Meals were eaten together, but no one looked up from their plates. Curtains stayed drawn, doors stayed locked. The attic door remained untouched, but its presence was heavy in the air. It was impossible to pass it without feeling the urge to glance over the shoulder. Neighbors, who had once been close friends, began to avoid them entirely. Some crossed the street to keep from walking past the Brennan property. Others lowered their voices if they saw a family member in the distance, not out of cruelty, but out of fear that proximity to the Brennans might be enough to invite the same fate. The psychological toll on the parents was impossible to miss. They aged twice as fast as the years passed, lines etched deep into their skin, hair turning white far too soon. They were seen sometimes walking the cliffs in the dead of night, their figures black against the pale line of the horizon, as if searching for something the sea might return. When the final disappearance came, the transformation of the house was complete. Every door inside was locked, except the front door. Every window was sealed shut. Photographs of the children were turned face down on shelves, not thrown away, but hidden from view, as though looking at them might make the silence in the rooms even louder. Town too carried the weight. Parents began to watch their own children more closely warning them not to wander near the Brennan property. Stories spread among the schoolchildren, tales of shadows that slipped through the cracks in the Brennan walls, of faces watching from the attic when no one was supposed to be inside. The fear was contagious, and it spread through the streets like a low fever. Over time, the trauma became part of the town's unspoken rules. No one mentioned the Brennans by name, unless they had to. No one celebrated a 16th birthday with joy anymore. The milestone was marked quietly, often without candles or music, as if any display might draw the wrong kind of attention. Even after the house fell into disrepair, the emotional residue remained. People said the air near it was heavier than standing at the front gate made the heart beat harder without reason. The grief of the family seemed to have seeped into the soil itself, leaving a permanent stain that no season could wash away. The story of the Brennans was no longer just a mystery. It was a wound carried in the minds of everyone who had lived through it. A wound that healed over in silence, but never truly closed. Asterisk. The official investigations into the Brennan vanishings never lasted long. Each case was marked as unresolved, often labeled as a runaway. Despite the lack of any supporting evidence, detectives came and went, each leaving with more questions than answers. Over the decades, the files grew thick, but no single report could connect the events in a way that satisfied logic. Rational theories were the first to surface. One suggested that the children were victims of hidden abuse and fled to escape it. Supporters of this idea pointed to the Brennan parents' strict rules and their increasing isolation from the town. Yet, no one could explain how not a single runaway left a trace. No train tickets, no sightings in the first crucial days, no letters home. Another rational theory claimed that an outsider had been targeting the family for unknown reasons, perhaps a former rival, a stalker, or someone connected to the land dispute the Brennans had in their early years. But the disappearances continued across multiple generations. The alleged predator would have had to maintain the same pattern for nearly a century, which made the idea almost impossible to accept. Then there were the theories that stepped beyond reason. One spoke of a curse bound to the land itself. The folklore claimed that the forest behind the house was once a place of offerings where the eldest child of each generation was given up to keep the land fertile and the sea calm. If the offering was not made willingly, the curse would take the child by force. The number 16 was said to be the age when the child was no longer protected by the spirits of the household. The Brennans' arrival to the land may have revived an old debt they knew nothing about. Another supernatural theory linked the attic to something not of this world. The glow, the cold air, the sense of being watched. Some said it was a doorway. Others said it was a prison, and that whatever was inside required the life of a child to remain sealed. Each disappearance was not the act of taking, but of keeping something far worse from being released. There were whispers of missing evidence, witness statements altered or removed from the files, objects connected to the children disappearing from storage. One officer resigned after claiming that someone higher up had ordered the attic never be opened during any search. No reason was given by the end. Every theory held enough weight to make someone believe and enough holes to make someone doubt. The truth sat somewhere in the middle of it all, waiting in the silence of that locked attic. The Brennan house stands empty. Now its paint is peeled away in long curling strips. Its windows are dark. Yet at night, some say they see a faint light behind the attic door, a cold light that does not move like fire or electricity. The yard is overgrown. The gate rusted into place. No one dares to push it open. Time has not erased the weight of what happened. If anything, it has deepened it. The vanishings are no longer active events. They are memories, but memories that carry the same sharpness as fresh wounds. The mystery has lived on in the town like a second shadow, one that no one invites, but everyone feels. Every so often a stranger will stop in the town, drawn by the whispers of the story. They will stand at the edge of the property looking up at the silent windows. Some leave quickly. Others stay too long and claim They hear something, a faint knock from above, a voice speaking just under the level of hearing. No one can say if these are tricks of the mind or if the house still remembers. There are rumors that a distant branch of the Brennan family exists far away in another part of the country. It is said they keep their children close as the 16th birthday approaches. Some have left town entirely in the weeks before, yet the pattern is patient. It has time. It will wait. And so the story remains unresolved. The truth has never been proven. Every theory has holes. Every witness has doubts. What is left is a single unbroken thread that no Brennan child has ever crossed the threshold of 16 and remained. If you were to walk past the house tonight and glance at the attic window, and if you saw a figure standing there in the pale light watching, would you tell yourself it was only your imagination, or would you keep walking, knowing that once the house has noticed you, it may start counting too?